Hey, Michael, thanks so much for joining the show today.
Thanks for having me, Alex.
Yeah, for sure. And to get started, could you give us a quick kind of background in your journey in design?
Yeah, sure. I'll try to be quick. So I had like many designers, pretty circuitous route. Started out thinking I wanted to be an architect, quickly got disabused of that. Studied industrial design, then graphic design, and then fine art. Doubled down on fine art and got my master's in fine art. After which I was working in a bank and they said, "Do you want us to get you an MBA? You're good at this." And I said, "What am I doing?" And so I kind of thought about what it was I really wanted to do. And I realized I wanted to make stuff that people used. The first several years of my life were primarily as a designer, were primarily in the consulting agency world, working for interactive agencies. And then when I moved to New York, I got very interested in the brand strategy business side of things. And then I kind of burned out at a certain point in 2009. My boys were born at that time, and one of them has and still has a lot of health and developmental issues, and realized the agency life was kind of tiring me out. So I went to a tech consultancy where I kind of led their UX HCI practice. And then I got an opportunity to go to TED a few years later, where I was the director of experience design for about 7.5 years. And that kind of like small, lean, scrappy team, nonprofit, TED's a nonprofit. That was a lot of fun. Got immersed in kind of the streaming, business, videos online. And we did everything. We thought about UX for conference tech and tooling. And then kind of out of the blue, the opportunity came up to join Warner Media at HBO Max, which is where I've been for the last 6 years, vice president of product design. I used to say I was a generalist. I realized that's not really true because I actually kind of in this time like went deep several times on areas of interest when I got kind of like curious about something like motion design or HCI or UX or accessibility or so I think that's kind of been the thing that's propelled me forward throughout my career is like deep areas of interest that keep me going.
Nice. I love that. Huge fan of Max. Just awesome content. It's one of my favorite streaming platforms. So it's awesome to have you on here. But I think like one of the themes you were talking about is like having to relearn and learn new areas. And I think every designer is going through that right now with AI. So, I mean, as a leader, how are you motivating or assuaging the team's fears that they're all going to be gone next week? How are you kind of leading and navigating the team through this change?
Yeah, so I never consider myself like bleeding edge, but like kind of I always like wait to see if something's gonna stick around. Like as I mentioned, when the web pretty clear that was gonna stick around, social media, mobile, NFTs, I was like, nah, I'm not so sure. Like these kind of moments. AI, kind of the same thing at first. I was like, I don't know. And then I started playing with them, to be honest with you, just because I'm still naturally very curious about like the design process. And I quickly learned their limitations and their strengths, at least at that point. And I got very excited about the potential. But I also realized that I like to think that I have a set of, moral bright lines or ethics when it comes to design. And I also realized like some people probably should be in this space who have been around for a little bit, I guess, to kind of guide that experience. So when I started to think about how my team should approach it, I wanted to go very gingerly at first. Like I'm not trying to like, get anybody on board, but I realized if you can build a little bit of excitement through some projects, and what happens is you find the designers who are really interested in doing it. And I'm very fortunate to work with a few who are very excited about it, very knowledgeable. And so you kind of slowly build momentum, right? And we're still working on that. I tend to think of AI in my business in kind of two ways. There's the product side, like how we're going to use it in terms of features and things for the customer. And then there's productivity and how we can use it both third-party tools as well as building some of our own tools to kind of make ourselves more efficient. All of which in my mind is kind of geared towards keeping designers strategic, keeping them in the center of the work, keeping them active participants in the process. If you're not, I mean, it seems pretty clear to me at this point, and I think to most people, that if you're not at least aware of the tools and starting to understand when and where you might use them, you're putting yourself at risk.
Yeah.
So for me, it was really like, how do we keep designers motivated and interested, but also how do we protect them?
Yeah, no, I love that. And I want to go to something else though, a bit deeper. We just got back from a product conference, and granted, product management's a different role than UX, but I feel like, very closely aligned and we're partnering with them all the time. And it seemed like so much of the audience was just burnt out from the pace of
Yeah.
product life cycles these days, a lot of AI fear. And I think the thing that struck out to me is like, are you enjoying your job? Like, why are you doing this? So many people just
Right.
kind of look drained, and I mean, it's a tough market. I get that, but how do you think about enjoying the craft or finding meaning in it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, certainly there are days when I feel it. I know there's
Yeah,
days when my team feels it. It's a weird economy. It's definitely look around, look at the news, existential stuff. It's kind of terrifying and also
yeah,
exhausting. So for me, what I always come back to is solving problems, right? It's the thing that if I look at the arc of my career and all of the different things that I've kind of dabbled in or worked in, the thing that always got me excited was the problem at hand, whether that was a business problem, a team problem, a product problem, a technology problem. I always think of design. I think my favorite quote by Lou Danziger is like, design is intelligence made visible, right? And so for me, it's about problem solving. And the way that I try to keep myself motivated is by digging deeper into projects. Like I've never been one to say like, okay, here's the requirements, go and design it. I want to drive the requirements. I want to do the kind of first principles thinking to understand why we're doing it and how we should do it. And I find that the designers that resonates with tend to stay motivated longer because they're no longer just on the treadmill of creation and making and hitting a deadline. They have an investment in the work. And in our field, I mean, certainly I'm very fortunate right now that I have a, close relationship with our user research team. So I feel like and our CX team, I feel like I have a pretty close relationship with our users and the problems that they're struggling with and our internal users as well. And so that keeps me motivated. Like, how can we make things easier and better all the time? Of course, given all the tech limitations and resources and, changing landscape of everything, it's exhausting. But on the day-to-day, I think focusing on the problems at hand really keep me excited.
I think you touched on something interesting there, being close to your users, and I think you're in an interesting space with the attention economy, right? Like you're competing against social media, streaming platforms, just so much content. How do you kind of think about that from a design perspective? Users have so much, I want to say choice, but I think the word I'm looking for is distraction.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things I like about our platform and our library is, as a studio, as a legacy studio, the quality of content that we have from HBO to TCM to DC to Studio Ghibli and so forth. So for me, like, it's pretty clear to me that we're no streamer or no, studio is necessarily going to win the war against social media or TikTok or YouTube, right? That's a different type. So for me, I keep thinking of what is the user mindset when they want to sit down and watch something like The Pit or, something from A24 TCM, right? And how do we get them to that as quickly as possible? How do we remove as much friction as possible? And what are the tools and levers that we can pull to do that? So I think it's less about trying to compete with the distraction economy and trying to figure out how to seed those moments of interest when you actually do want to go deeper. As kind of just a funny like analog, I used to be a voracious reader. Like I used to read a lot of books. And then I'm like many people, I kind of stopped and I read a lot of blog posts and everything. And my reading time tends to be at night. And so, a book wasn't really working. Lots of excuses, right? But recently I just kind of realized, I'm just tired of not reading books. And so I got a Kindle like Paperwhite. And I made a promise, like after a certain hour, I'm putting all the devices down, a regular device, not the Kindle, but like, and I'm going to carve out that time, actually have a deeper engagement with the content, to read books again. So far, it's been about 6 months, and I'm really enjoying it, and I do it every night. And I do believe that as much as we are distracted, there is a desire for those deeper connections with content, with stories, and I'm hoping that we can overcome the noise and that we can carve out that moment for people.
Yeah, I think you touched on it, like A24, The Pit, which just won a bunch of Emmys. Awesome show. It's like the quality is there, and that's what keeps me coming back
Mhm.
to you all. It's awesome. And I also think you've nailed something that I don't necessarily see on other streaming platforms, which is like that paradox of choice. I think you alluded to it of we want you to get there quick. And I think it's weird. Like we're in this place where there's so much content.
I mean, without getting too much into the nuts and bolts of what we do, and obviously, I like to think we're always trying to evolve, and hopefully big evolution's coming. But for me, one thing I would say, and I'm always saying to the team, is like, if you're opening the app and you're starting your journey there, that's the toughest point to be as a user, right? Like you don't know what to watch and now you're hoping to find something. And that's where social media apps like TikTok, because there's like no friction, or YouTube, which just gets to know you very quickly and can immediately immerse you in some 10, 15-minute low risk content. That's where they have kind of like an undeniable edge. So for me, I try to think about like, what is the mindset that people are in before they ever get to the app? And what are the kinds of things we should be thinking about before they open it so that when they get there, they're kind of primed. They don't necessarily need to know exactly what to watch, but they have a scent, they have an idea. And then obviously reinforcing that through useful features within the product. It's a tough challenge. It's a tough challenge. I do think for all the streamers for many years now have been kind of following the a similar paradigm as kind of was established by video stores back in the 90s, like, the Blockbuster kind of shelf and rail and title thing. And that works. But I think it works for people who are browsing. And I think for more intentional viewing, we have to find better levers to get them into the content.
Yeah. Thanks for breaking that down for us. The question I always ask, tough time for people breaking into the field. What advice do you have for those people looking to break into UX today?
One thing that hasn't changed is it's a hard field to break into. It always has been. And the reason is I feel like we've never had a great apprentice kind of mentality. Like we've never said, okay, we're going to take somebody who's very junior and cultivate them. Because usually by the time you're hiring somebody, you're in desperate straits. You're like, I need a body. They have to come in. They have to know Figma. They have to hit the ground running, right? And so that's a really hard spot to be in if you haven't ever worked in a company before. You haven't had a job as a designer before. And so you're kind of like fighting. Somehow they don't ask this of a lot of other professions. Of course, I'm not talking about like being a doctor or something. Obviously, you have to have that. But in our profession, you can kind of get a toehold in there with minimal experience. But everyone wants to see a solid book. They want to see case studies. They want to see like great design acumen and so forth and solid thinking. So like it's tough for somebody just starting out. I'm afraid the advice that I generally give is kind of the same as I've always given, which is try to find examples or projects you can work on that demonstrate your thinking and your ability. And even if those projects, and I have a take here that's not always everyone agrees with, like not speculative projects. Don't go and redesign Spotify. Everyone's done that. But like I have hired designers in the past who had a very, very thin portfolio, but who had one or two personal projects that were very, very compelling and that they could tell a story about and that they didn't have to have a job to do. I mean, it's tough. I get it. It's hard to put somebody in that position, but I think it's almost like an actor who's never been in anything. How do they break in? They have to have something. Maybe they find a friend who's good videographer to help them like create a scene. To some extent, you've got to create that artifact that you can share. So I think the thing that I'm very wary of is kind of the templatized portfolio, like the kind of boot camp, I worked on this thing. It's clear you worked on it for 12 weeks, the wireframe, the whole thing. And I'm not casting aspersions on that. I'm not trying to gatekeep. It's just when you start to see 200 portfolios that look like that, it's very hard to differentiate the thinking. I'd much rather see somebody who did one thing very different and unusual. And I guess if I'm focusing on that top of the funnel moment, that kind of like, if I can use some marketing jargon, like before you've got your toe in the door, your foot in the door, your goal really should be to give enough information to get a screener, a recruiter, or somebody to call you in for an interview. Not so much that you're trying to tell the whole story, because then you might give some information that kind of tips the hat the other way, but to provoke a conversation. Why I say this is a little bit of a controversial view is I've heard some design leads say, oh no, if you don't have voluminous studies with tons of details and everything, I'm not going to look at it. And I'm like, you must have more time than I do, because I'm hitting a portfolio, an app that takes somebody 20 minutes to understand what it's about. I've failed.
Yeah.
So a designer who's being told your portfolio should take 20 minutes to get through, you're just trying to drive interest, and you need to drive enough interest to get somebody to go, I want to actually meet with this person. The advice I would say once you kind of get your first gig is like, that's when it gets a lot easier. I mean, maybe not a lot easier, but it gets easier because now you've got a track record and you're starting to build your portfolio, your knowledge, your connections. But that first moment is very hard.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, we're both hiring managers, and yeah, we have 30 seconds to see
Yeah,
your in it, and it has to stick out and stand out. So,
right.
Michael, thank you so much for joining the show today and sharing these insights. I really appreciate it.
You got it. Thanks for the time. It was fun.